want to talk about a topic that, some people have questioned before, kind of when we did, Noelle and I did our live um, broadcast on YouTube. But this is a topic that is not really sensitive really any longer, but the question is is divorce an answer? Now, this may be a sensitive topic for some and for others maybe not, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone, obviously. Those who are more religious may feel differently than the views I express here. And those who may not even, it's not necessarily a religious view, it's just from a personal standpoint. That's totally fine. But is divorce an option? Now, I'm going to go back on my story a little bit about what is my circumstance, or was my circumstance. I got married when I was, oh God, what was that? I think maybe 2002. I think I got married in 2002. So I was young. I was about 23, I believe, at the time. And so that's not super young, but I mean, 23. I mean, you don't really, now looking back, 38-year-old mind looking back, at least for me, you don't really know what you want in life. You're not really grown. I mean, you're grown, you're an adult, but like you haven't grown. I think, the vast majority of the time, it's like you haven't really grown. And the person I was married to was a year younger than me, and two different cultures. She was from Hong Kong, and so it was, that was challenging to begin with. Two different cultures. We had two different type of upbringings. So those things were really a challenge. And then you throw in the fact that you have two people who are very, very young. It's a bad recipe. So for my part, which I can definitely talk about, I can say right now, I was definitely immature. You're 23. I was immature quite a bit at the time. There was a lot of things that would easily get under my skin, a lot of things that would bother me, a lot of things that just didn't make sense to me. Didn't really try hard if things really, annoyed me, that type of thing. But on the flips, not to say I didn't love my ex-wife, obviously I did, but you just don't really value things as much, or I guess me. I didn't really value things as much at that point in time as I do now. And then when you take the other person, it's kind of similar, like they have their own things, their own views, their own everything else, and probably a lot of lack of maturity there as well. And you take those two things and it just doesn't make sense. So for me, divorce made sense. Now, I wasn't the one that pulled the trigger on it, and I don't think that I could have at the time, because I had even mentioned, now, yes, we had talked about it, but I'd even mentioned that, it's not something that I'm really looking to do. I wanted to kind of hold on to, you gotta understand, my mother and father were divorced. So I didn't want to end up in that same cycle. If you notice, I did a video that talks about, growing up as raising daughters as a black father, because I didn't have a father to really raise me. So I wanted to break that cycle. And so I made sure that her and I we didn't have kids. My ex-wife and we didn't have kids. So would that have happened later on down the line? I don't know. But it just felt like, to me, like things after about the first year or so, things didn't seem super solid of what I felt like a relationship should be. It didn't seem like, there's this cohesiveness that I felt like we should have had. I didn't know what that really would have looked like, but it just didn't feel like it was there. And also, she wanted to move from my hometown all the way across country, where her family, she had family in the U.S., where her family was, and I didn't want to do it. I just didn't, again, there was a gut feeling that just didn't feel like, I didn't feel like it would have been good overall. I felt like I would have had definitely my back up against the wall. So I didn't do it, and it was actually a good thing that I didn't do it. Had I did that, yeah, I would have had my back up against the wall. More than likely, my mother would have had to, help me out and get me back over here. It was an expensive city that she had moved to. Now I can afford the city, but back then I definitely couldn't have. It would have completely handicapped me. I wouldn't have met Noelle. So there would have been a lot of things that would have been really, really bad. So when you have two people who are steadily growing apart and they don't really understand all of the circumstances as to why they're growing apart, and then you couple that with cultural expectations on both sides and all of that type of stuff, you really and you keep in mind I only knew her for a year, but you end up knowing someone in school for a year and then and dating them that amount of time changes when you start to marry a person. They used to always say if you're dating someone and you're just having fun and that type of thing, things change when you actually sleep with that person. And that's very true when it comes to marriage. If you're dating someone, different ball game. Once you sign the papers and say I do, things change. That's everyone. So it became a point in time, after a certain amount of time, it became a point in time where it seemed like this wasn't something that was going to work. My mother's someone who was a really great person, but even my mother and my ex didn't really get along. My mother, by the way, loves Noelle. It's all she talks about. But it was becoming a big fracture. So at that time, I was finishing school because I had been working, going through school and that type of thing. And my ex and I were married for about 4.5 years. So I was going through school and working, but I was about to graduate at that point in time. Well, at that point in time, I was working part-time. So, and she was full-time. She had already finished and everything. But she was working full-time and had insurance. Once the divorce happened, I had no more insurance. I had it, I think, for another month, but that was it. Nothing. So then couple that with the fact that I was living in a pretty wealthy part of Indianapolis, and I'm thinking, how can I afford the rent here? Like, I can't afford the rent here. I don't know what to do. I had experience living in a different part of Indy, and it was just, it was kind of sketchy. That was an area I could afford. There was another place over by where she was living that I could afford, but too close for comfort. So an area that I knew for certain that her and I had lived at before, that's where I went back to. But it was extremely expensive. So then I'm faced with all these different crises. Like, within a couple of months, I would have been broke. I would not have had, and on top of that, I had a car that was barely hanging on, and I had to drive 30 miles one way to work and 30 miles back, all in the same city of Indianapolis. Indianapolis is just huge. So I was petrified at what was going to happen. But God was looking out for me, because there was the company I worked for, they were actually looking to promote someone to supervisor. So my boss told me, hey, I really think you'd be good at it, so you need to really, focus and do what you have to do. I literally changed. Once that divorce happened, my whole mind changed. Like, that was when I really grew up quickly. I grew up quick. And so I focused really hard, improved greatly in terms of my performance. I went in there, gave the best interview of my life to some corporate guy that was from a totally different town. And guess what? Boom. I ended up getting a promotion, almost doubling my salary. That apartment no longer was a problem. The insurance was no longer a problem. I could pay it. I was paying my rent 2 weeks ahead of time. I got a brand new car and actually even ended up buying my first brand new house. All of this happened because of the result, because of the divorce. It made me grow up. So, yeah, I think sometimes you have to actually take that step and say, yeah, divorce is worth it. Should you work it out and do the best you can? Absolutely. But sometimes that's not really the option. Hope you enjoyed this video about my little story, little background story about me. Like and subscribe, and until next time, I'll see you. Take care.